press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste, and I welcome you again to this 10 p.m. show of Jaipur Dialogues. And today I have with me again Professor Subhash Kak. Namaste, Professor Kak. You already know him very well.
Namaste, Sanjay ji. Glad to be on your show.
And today we have a very fascinating topic on which there's a lot of scholarship that Professor Kak has. And as you know, he is a polymath. He knows so many languages and he knows so many disciplines. As a profession, he is supposed to be a professor of computer science in Oklahoma University in Stillwater. But we all know him, at least the Indians know him, for all the prodigious work he's produced. And there's something that people don't know, and that is that he is also a poet. This is something that even I came to know very recently. So we have this great person with us, and I'm going to ask him some searching questions. And this is regarding the work that he's done on what is called, I think it's a pejorative. I don't like to use that term, paganism. This paganism is a Christian pejorative for the great civilizations that preceded them. And let's call them the pre-Christianity worshippers or pre-Christianity worship systems. Now, we know that the Christianity is they had this great fascination, just like all other the other Abrahamic religion, not all the other, because Judaism doesn't profess proselytization. But just like Islam, Christianity also had this great fascination for not just dominating, but exterminating worship systems, exterminating civilizations, and supplanting Christianity and the Western worldview in their lieu. And they did that ruthlessly, but they came a little late to Eastern Europe. And I believe, I think, Baltics and Scandinavia were the last ones to be proselytized. Russia was a little earlier, but it went to the more to the Orthodox system, the Orthodox Church. You say in your work, one of your works, that there is now a great fascination, some kind of a renaissance, because basically the Renaissance and Enlightenment was also when the Europeans started trying, the Western Europeans started trying to trace their roots back to Greece. And according to you, now these people are tracing their roots back to their ancient worship systems. Now, what exactly are those worship systems? Could you just enlighten us first in the context of Eastern Europe and Russia?
Absolutely, Sanjay ji. It's a fascinating subject, and a lot of scholars have been working on it for many decades in the West. And basically, what happened in Eastern Europe, which includes the Slavic lands, which is Russian and the Poles and the Czechs and the Serbs and so on, which is a huge part of Europe. So the Slavic lands were converted to Christianity quite late, and in fact, maybe about 1,000 years ago. And according to historians, people in the villages continued to practice their old religion. And it's for this reason that the Russian Christianity is also sometimes called Dvoveri, which in Hindi would be Dohri. Do for two, veri meaning truths. In other words, formally, they did what the church expected them to do, but in their own practices at home, they continued with their old ways until very, very recently. But there's also a continuing pushback, and this is very, very interesting. In the pre-Christian Roman religion, when you went circumambulated divinity, you went rightwards, which is pradakshina, right? The rightwards, because the right side is supposed to be the more sacred side, and so you keep the divinity to your right side. But the Christian church reversed it. In Christian church, this is always done leftwards. The right words in Latin is called dexter. The left word is called sinister, because left words is sinister, right? So the Russian Orthodox people were very, very upset with it. And it's only 300-400 years ago, eventually, the church allowed them, even within the church, to go dexter and not sinister, as is the standard practice in the church. So they have been holding on to bits and pieces, to symbols, and not necessarily the overall comprehensive view. Now, which is where we see some amazing stuff. For example, the pre-Christian church had divinities which were Vedic divinities. The main god was Perkonis, which is Parjanya, which is, of course, in the Vedas, this is the divinity of thunder, which is one form of Indra, right? Parjanya is one form of Indra. So Perkonis was the main god, and how the Eastern Europeans were converted was through what is called the Northern Crusades. You know, when the crusades in the south, namely to Israel, etc., or Palestine, ended or failed, when Europeans failed there, then the church turned its energy on conversion of the northern people, who were the Slavic people. So there was a lot of force used. So there are lots of histories which were written by church individuals, which tell us how the image of Perkonis, that is Parjanya, was dragged down and, you know, put in the mud and this and that. So a lot of evidence to that effect. Now, the divinities that the Slavs worshipped, for example, included Ashvinau, Usha. Amongst the Slavs, you also have, the name for God is Bog or Bhaga. So that becomes Bog. And Agni Bhaga is called Agni Bog. And likewise, you have Shiva Bhaga. You have also dualities like Shibog and Shiva, which means Shiva Bhaga and Shiva, or Rod and Rodanicha, which is Rudra and Rudrani, and so on. And there's also this idea of triplicate reality, just as we have, you know, the whole Vedic system is Trayi Vidya. You know, you have Bhu, Bhuva, Swaha, right? The three layers, both in the outside cosmos and the inner cosmos. So in the Slavic world, there is what is called Triglav or Tribog. So Tribog, three divinities which represent the mystery of the universe. Now, there's something even more interesting, and this really provides us a very fascinating connection. As we know, in Vedas, the very heart of Vedas is, as in Vedanta, that ultimately Brahman is in which everything is contained, right? And so, and within us, you have Mahavakyas such as I am Atma Brahma, that I am also Brahma. So that within you have the capacity to understand the whole cosmos. So now this goes very far back to the very heart of the Vedas. So that's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, at least. But now, after Shankaracharya, you know, his famous statement, Shivoham, I am Shiva, right? So I am my consciousness, or Shiva is my consciousness and I am him. A similar development took place in Kashmir, which is called Kashmir Shaivism now, but it's really Shaiva Darshan, in which Shiva is called Prakash. So what is this? What is God? God is that Prakash, that light, which falls on things, in this dark chamber of your brain. There's all dark, there's no light, right? But there is this transcendent light which falls into the images and gives it meaning. Prakash was the central idea. And it's such a powerful idea. And you have great philosophers like Utpal Dev, like Abhinav Gupta, and many others who wrote on it. And right now it is sweeping all across the world. So it was sweeping across the world even then. So this idea of Prakash as divinity, as God, went from Kashmir. One can guess, we don't have the whole story. And in the Slavic world, the main name of divinity was called Shvetavid. Shvetavid meaning the knower of light. Shvetavid. And Shvetavid
Okay.
was given four faces, and these four faces faced the cardinal directions. The northern face was called Swarga, and the color that was assigned to it was white. The western face was called Perkonis, or Parjanya, and the color that was given to it was red. The southern face was called Lada, and Lada is from the Sanskrit Ladaha, which means what is loved, and what is another name for earth. So this, and the color that was given to it was black, right? Because earth is also Martyaloka, right? And Martyaloka is connected to Yama, and the color of Yama is black. And east, the name they gave, these are all Slavic names. The northern was Svarag, left was Parjanya Perkonis, southern was Lada, and eastern they call Moksha. So the name of divinity is Moksha, and the color that they gave it was green. Now I have a theory. I haven't written on it why they gave it the color green. As we know in Sanskrit, Hari actually means golden. Vishnu in the image of the sun is golden. But the Hari comes from Harit, which is green. You have look at the crops. Ordinarily they're green, but when they are full and ripe, then become golden. So in Sanskrit and in Hindi also, the word Hari can sometimes denote or represent green, and sometimes it represents golden. It depends on the context. The crop is both Harit,
Okay.
and ultimately it becomes golden, right? So I think because all these subtleties were not widely known to these missionaries who went on from India, to all over the world, the ancient world, towards the East, which we know very well. Everybody knows Mahayana and the development of Chinese civilization and the Japanese, etc. The word dhyana becomes Jan and becomes Zen and everything else. All those ideas, they went from missionaries from India to the West as well. And these subtleties were not that well communicated, and therefore the eastern direction, the Swarga direction, not the Swarga, I'm sorry, the Moksha direction was given the color green. Amazing stories here.
Okay. So that is the Slav area. But I believe the Baltics have the god Romuva.
Yeah.
That is also take on probably Ram. Or if you go to the Scandinavian god, they also have something similar.
Absolutely. Baltics, Lithuania, the language is also has similarities, but of course, the records of Lithuanian that we have are only 600-700 years old. Before that, there was no recorded literature. Now, the religion is called Dharna, from Dharma, and then they also have for earth the name Zemi, which is from Sanskrit Kshama. For example, in the Rig Veda, one of the dual phrases is Kshama Dyava. Earth, Kshama is earth, and Dyava is, of course, the sky, right? So instead of Kshama, they call it Zema. They have Ashvinau, they have Usha, they have Medani. That's also from the Rig Veda. Medani is another name for the earth. And in fact, that's why you may have come across, the revolution that took place in Ukraine was in the Maidan. The word Maidan is also a part of the Slavic language. In fact, the big ground in Kiev where all the protests were taking place was called the Maidan, from Maidani.
Okay.
So Maidani is earth. So any open land of earth is Maidan. Sometimes Indians have forgotten that Maidani is attested in the Rig Veda. Sometimes they think, hey, it came from Persia. No. It's very old. It's like the word Asman is also from the Rig Veda, Ashman, as the bright stone in the sky, Ashman, right? But what's interesting is I'm just veering off for a moment. Ashman is a stone in the sky, which is where Asman in Farsi comes from. But the term that was used later on in Sanskrit and in Indian languages is Akash. Kash means light, where light is coming in. So the focus was on light, on knowledge, while the focus in Asman is on unrelenting faith, because a stone does not listen to you. So it's very, very interesting that Mamata Banerjee recently wanted or has asked for the Akash word in Bengali to be changed by Asman. She doesn't know all this fine thing that Akash means a sky where knowledge is open to you, while Asman is also sky, even in Sanskrit, Ashman. But it's a sky which is totally disconnected from where knowledge cannot come in. So you have this. You also have Romuva. Yeah, the original basis to it is the term Ram, which is a term of auspiciousness, of mercy, and of pleasantness. Ram always is pleasant, and the only thing that is ever present is, in fact, I was a young boy. I remember I was born in Srinagar, but as a young boy, I spent a few years in Jammu, Udhampur, which is where, for the first time, when I was a boy of 6 or 7, I came across this procession in the street where we lived, where these people were carrying this body on their shoulders and saying, Ram Nam Sat Hai, Ram Nam Sat Hai. So I asked my father, I said, why? Because the only thing that is forever is the name Ram. So the term Ram had gone in all directions. You also have in Avesta a Yasht on Ram, where so it went all the way to the west. And then in Scandinavia,
I think Ram has various meanings. One of them is Ranjanati iti Rama.
Absolutely, who's always pleasant and happy, brings happiness in everybody. And because if you look at life from a pleasant perspective, life also is something to be enjoyed, and so Ram Nam Sat Hai, in that sense.
There is one chaupai in Ramcharitmanas. It says, Bandahu Naam Ram Raghuvar ko Hetu Krisanu Bhanu Himakar ko. So Ra is for Krisanu, that is Agni, and Bhanu is of course Surya. So A is for Aditya, for Surya, and Ma Himakar is for moon. So Ram contains Agni Tattva, the Aditya Tattva, and the Himakar, that is the Chandra Tattva. This is how Ramacharitmanas is describing Ram.
Beautiful. All these wonderful things are a part of our inherited knowledge, which is communicated through even festivals, through the stories that our grandmothers tell us, because they know a lot of this at a very subtle level. Now, we were talking about the rest of Europe.
Before we go to rest of Europe, I just have one little question. Sorry to interrupt. That this whole thing about this fascination of Persian, and we know that Persian is almost entirely a descendant of the Vedic Sanskrit, from Vedic Sanskrit to Avestan to Persian. I think that should kind of shake up the smugness of these little, what is called the Persian culture or the composite culture vultures that we have in India.
Well, I think it's very sad that scholars in India and other people in the literary world have not explored the deep connections between India and Persia. And you're absolutely right. Avestan, which is the earliest form of Persian, which goes to maybe about 1200 BCE, is quite similar to later Vedic Sanskrit, maybe Atharva Vedic Sanskrit. So it's much later. And almost all the words in Persian which are from Old Persian have corresponding Sanskrit cognates. In fact, I was just talking the other day somewhere, certainly the word Khurshid, for example, which is Khar, Swar becomes Khar, Swar becomes Khar. So one of the names for the sun is Khar, right? And Khurshid is becomes, Kshait means bright. So Khurshid is the radiance of the sun, right? So almost every word can be so analyzed. And this should be done because it'll also set a lot of people free. I think to know history is to become free. For example, the word Khan, which is commonly used by many people in India, is actually a Mongolian name, Genghis Khan. And Mongols were also what would be called pagans. They worshipped the sky. In fact, their main god was Tengri, which, according to some scholars, the correct etymology is Tanugiri, the mountain which keeps on expanding, which is a Sanskritic etymology. And why Sanskritic, you might ask? Because Mongolian is not a Sanskritic language. Because Buddhism was already a part of all of Northern Asia, the Mongols and so on. So Sanskrit was already influencing the Mongols in a very strong way. And Khan is a Mongol name. And Genghis Khan himself was a Tengri worshipper. So, but then since the Mongols, through their descendants, conquered parts of India, so it's often for people want to go by the name of the winner. So the winner was a Khan at that time. So they thought, well, this is an Islamic name, but really it's a pagan name. It's a Tengri name. And I think it's good to know what these names mean, because then you relate to history in a more logical way. It's like it's something parallel to it even in self-reflection. If you think about yourself and you separate your true self from what happens to you in your life, then you have a better handle on who you are. You become calmer. I think something similar needs to be done on a larger basis in history, which sadly India has not done in the last 50 or 60 years.
Outside the Indian subcontinent, not even in Afghanistan. Forget about Iran or the Arab world. So the only Khans that you find today, not even in Central Asia, I think Central Asia has also lost it, where it should actually have been. And they only exist in the Indian subcontinent. So that is the kind of disconnect that people have from their history. I will also request my viewers to please start asking questions to Professor Kak, because this topic is going to get more and more interesting. Do keep sharing, liking, subscribing, pressing the bell icon. And also do favor us with your contributions if you like our content and if you like our guests. So, Professor Kak, let's move back to Eastern Europe. And you were mentioning about Romuva, and I think we could move to a little farther west. And if you look at Czechoslovakia, and if you could look even the river Danube, for instance. The river Danube itself has a Vedic etymology.
Right. All these names, Danube from Danu, named for water, and Nista, which is southern water, and so on. All these names, river names, have a Sanskritic etymology. But I think what is also happening, which is what we wanted to talk about, is how people in Europe want to go back to their origins. Science. What is science all about? Science is knowing whatever we can of our natural world, physical world, but also of our past. And for this reason, there is an attempt to go back to their old divinities, which are really Vedic divinities. If once they know it, sometimes people get attached to names. They say, "Hey, but was..." Sometimes it's so ridiculous. You have so-called Western scholars. They say, "But how do we know that the name Durga was used in such and such time? Maybe Durga was a name that came up later." Well, these are just placeholders. Amba is the name of the goddess, right? You go back in the Rig Veda itself, and then you can use different names. It doesn't mean that suddenly a new Devi has come. It's a different name for the Devi. It's a different name for the Deva, which is something that the shallow scholar from the West cannot understand. That's what becomes a big problem to that person. Now, what the Europeans, many Europeans, because they are abandoning, they are abandoning Christianity in a big way. In fact, if you look at the data from the latest census in Czechia, which is the Czech part of the former Czechoslovakia, you'll see that I think maybe only 10% of the Czechians call themselves Christian anymore. And so there are people they want to go back. And of course, some of them say, well, we don't have any religion, but there are some who want to go back and be connected to these divinities, because really, these are really not names. These pre-Christian divinities are different aspects of one's inner self, of consciousness. They are a pathway to knowledge, which many people don't, even in Europe, may not know. They may be looking at it more as symbols. But in any event, in Lithuania, there has been an attempt to revive what is called Romuva, and their symbol is the swastika, and they have their ceremonies up in the forests and other places, connected with nature, and be connected to the solstices and the equinoxes. So you're connecting to the larger natural processes. Likewise, in Iceland, they have built a new temple, goes back to their old divinities, and they call it the Asatru religion, which is, another name. Now, if you go back to Scandinavia, again, there's an attempt to revive old divinities, and their main divinity was called Wotan, or Odin. And Wotan is, the Sanskrit cognate is Budhan. Budhan means someone who knows the Vedas. And another cognate is Buddha. Now, who's Buddha? Jamani Grahya Sutra tells us that Buddha, the planet Buddha, the Graha Buddha, is another name for Vishnu. And we find that Buddha was also worshipped by the Celtics who were spread all the way from East Europe all the way to Ireland. The Irish are Celts. So Buddha, so there was a worship of Vishnu in the form of Buddha, and so on. And there are also connections with southern religions as well. I mean, south of Germany and so on. We're talking of Italy and Greece and of course you had the Druids. Druids were the priests to the Celts. And the etymology of Druid is Druvid. Druvid meaning the knower, Dru meaning the tree of life, so to speak. So they were the priests. And you go back to history and you find that Caesar, or Caesar writes about Julius Caesar, because he had his battles in Gaul, which is France, and he talks about the Druids and what they worshipped and this and that. And all these wonderful connections. And in fact, since we mentioned Caesar, we know that the corresponding word in India is Kesari. Kesari meaning the one with the golden mane. And that's what Caesar, it's really Kaiser. The way it was pronounced in ancient Rome is Kaiser. The English call it Caesar because they forgot that C was K. But as you know, the Germans call it Kaiser. Kaisere Hind or whatever. And the Russians have Tsar from the same word. But in India, it was Kesari, the same word.
Right. And Kesari is one of the names of Hanumanji as well.
Absolutely. It goes back very ancient times. Kesari, lion. Lion's mane is also Kesari. Like Singer. So Kesari is another, form of the king. So because he's the lion, he's got a golden mane. Hanumanji, of course, is Kesari.
I also believe that even in the Western Europe and even in the United States, there is a lot of interest in revival of these old pre-Christianity systems, worship systems, or if you may so call it, religions.
Oh, absolutely. In the US, there's a very strong movement. There are all these Romuva Church and Asatru and the others, and Wiccans and so on. Heathens. The Germans, before they became Christian, also worshipped these divinities. And then the pejorative term heathen was used. So now there are churches, they say that we are heathens. And that's a very popular movement which is taking root in the United States. So United States, it's happening at many different levels. And also in the US and as well as in Europe, you have at the same time this river, the big river of yoga and all this spirituality and Vedas and Vedanta, which people are connected to. They know that indeed behind all the outer symbols and the names that have been preserved from ancient Europe was this deeper understanding and knowledge, which is beyond words, because this is the knowledge which anybody can obtain. And this is the knowledge through the slogan, Shivoham, right? Or Soham, which is, of course, much earlier in Ishavasya Upanishad itself. Saha Aham, that I am he, because I am truly my consciousness, and consciousness is who God is. Imagine what an exciting statement it is. It sets you free. It sets you free. It means that you don't have to go to anybody. You have access to this knowledge, and which I was talking about Kashmir Shaivism earlier on, is called Pratyabhigna, the recognition of oneself. And all of journeying is then recognition of oneself. And it really sets one free. Religion becomes a beautiful thing once again. It doesn't bind you. It doesn't put you in a box. It sets you free. And that's what Prakash should be all about. That's what truly religion should be all about.
That's a wonderful explanation. And I believe in the United States now, the number of people who own up to Christianity are just about a little more than 50% or so, 55% at the last count. Was it that?
Yes. So it is, I think people want to be connected to spirituality. Spirit, of course, has a fuzzy term. What does spirit mean? In Vedic thought, spirit is Prakash. I said Shiva is Prakash. You can understand light. Everybody knows light. Why? Because the brain is a dark, dead place. How do we see things? Where does this light come in from? This is not this light, because that light doesn't go beyond the eyes, right? So what is that light which lets you make sense of reality? And that light is what God is, according to the Vedas. It's the most amazing and liberating thought. And this is that thought that people want to get connected to. And it's a thought which is also powerful in whatever you do as a writer, as a creative person, as a scientist, as whatever task that you have. First of all, it tells you that everybody is equal. All human beings, all life is to be valued and respected. And so we are all at the same place. So we can all be brothers and sisters. Isn't that a wonderful thought? Than to believe that somebody else is inferior to you and then to try to dominate them or kill them, as some people want to do. So this is what we need in this post-modern world as a global village. We need, and not just because it sounds good, because it truly makes sense. It truly is the truth that there is a single light which connects all human beings. And we should celebrate that. And we should celebrate that in so many different ways, and possibly also let young people who feel very lost these days in this age also of computers and phones and social isolation, they think that life may not be worth living. This tells you that there are infinite things to be explored within. And that is a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful thought, Professor Kak, that the postmodern world could actually be very meaningful with the sublimation of identities, whereas the postmodernist movement is actually identification of identities and more division into identities. So I think we need a new definition for postmodernism, really.
Oh, absolutely, Sanjay ji, you're right. I think the Western university is in a state of crisis because they're only looking at identification of outer forms and how these outer forms are different from one to the other, and going back into resentments in history of why this outer form, why this shade of brown uh, ruled over another shade of brown in history. So now we must destroy all statues and rewrite stuff and do utabati, punish people, that why did your forefathers do this? That's all ridiculous and superficial. What one needs is to confront the truly fundamental questions of what does it mean to be a human being? How do you make sense of life? How do you give equal opportunity and equal hope to every human being, irrespective of where they are from, which part of the world and which culture? And you can only do it by appealing to something beautiful and transcendent. And that's what will also happen in the West, because the Western universities, as I just mentioned, are in a state of crisis, and many of them will go under because of pressures arising out of technology changing. Right, you don't need expensive education where you're spending in a private Western university almost half a crore a year on tuition and expenses. People would say, well, this information is all freely available on the internet. Why should I be doing it? What are the jobs at the end of it? So a lot of that will go down. In my view, Sanjay ji, what is required for all this wonderful wisdom that we have, we need to create some new platforms which are technology based, but which also have another human centric component, which can then be the vehicles to communicate this knowledge all across the world, because people are thirsting for this knowledge. And it's not available in the university, this, as you said, this postmodern thing of differentiation. To what end? Where are you going to go with that? We want knowledge. We want to go to the deepest aspect of what issues concern every human being. And maybe this is the time for us to, leverage technology and be able to do it.
Quite right. I think that's very well put. And even in Bhagavad Gita, I think Bhagwan is trying to sublimate the identities. And even while Arjun is struggling with that identification that he has with his own weaknesses, and looks in the outer form, the form of his relatives and relations. And even while Bhagavan tells him that, okay, the all is one and this is my Virat Swarup, and that you look at it, at the same time, he tells them that the Dushta Prakriti, the Tamsi Prakriti, they have to be dealt with at the same time. That you cannot let them roll over you. That you cannot allow them to completely annihilate you just because you are a decent person. So I think that is the message that Bhagavad Gita holds for everyone, and that is where it comes from. Let us now move to the questions, because we already have a lot of questions. And any questions you want to shoot, viewers, the time is now. Okay, so we'll have the questions coming up on the screen. As usual, you're familiar with the process.
Right.